This is me doing a deadlift, and one more time, this time round, I'm trying to exaggerate my hip to be a little bit lower. You can see that my hip shoots up and my back angle becomes more horizontal as I'm pulling this way. But this doesn't happen because I'm exaggerating this position. This also happens with Russell Orhe, Mike Tushier, Tian Towell, he's doing the clean, and also Martin Licious with the coaching of the famous Dr. Aaron Horschig. See that one more time. Pay attention to the hip position and the back angle as Martin is pulling it. He likes it.
I like it.
But I don't really like it. Before we continue the discussion, we need to agree on the basic principle that the most efficient way to lift an object is vertically up when the object is right on top of the center of balance. In this case, if I want to lift this plate, I better position myself really close to the plate and lift it vertically up. If I put myself away from this plate, I would create a movement arm between the plate and my center of balance. This movement arm will require me to use more force to lift up the object. We can also apply this principle in a deadlift. We want the barbell to be right on top of the midfoot, right when we pull it. Our hip is connected to our femur and to our shins from our knee. The moment we set our hip too low, our femur will become more horizontal. This pushes the knees forward, thus the bar will be in front of the midfoot. Like what we discussed earlier, this will introduce an unnecessary movement arm that we need to play against. So what happens if we force ourselves to pull from this position? As you can see over here, our hip will shoot up, the knees will travel back, the shin will become more vertical, and as we pull the bar, you can see that the bar is approaching closer and closer to the middle of our foot, making it more and more efficient to pull.
I like it.
Now that we understand that the hip raising might happen to regain some amount of efficiency, I want you to pay attention of our knee and hip angle. At the bottom of the deadlift, obviously, our knees and hips are bent, and we are doing a knee extension and hip extension to stand up and fully finish the movement. So when the hip raises up, you can see that the back becomes a little bit horizontal before it becomes more vertical again. The question is why? I think the answer is because when the hips are too low and the knees are too bent, this position doesn't transfer the force very well. In order for us to transfer force through a segment, that segment needs to be rigid enough. However, if we are transferring force through a joint or a fulcrum, there needs to be enough amount of resisting moment force to transfer that force. Let me show you this example where I tape a scissors on one handle and I'm trying to pull the whole scissors up from the other handle. The moment I exerted the force, the scissors still stays on the table. However, the upper handle starts to raise up and starts to rotate around the fulcrum of the scissors. Since there's not enough resistance in this range of motion, that handle rotates all the way into full lock, which is the end range of motion, before I can lift up the whole scissors. If I attach rubber bands around the handles, these bands would create resistance so that the upward force that I generate doesn't fully convert to rotation around the fulcrum. It also transfers the vertical force that I generate to the scissors. This is why the scissors doesn't need to go in full lock before it is completely off the table. When we produce the force through the floor, it needs to be transferred all the way from the legs through our back to our arms to the bar. If there's not enough resistance on the hip, we are not able to do any hip extension to transmit the force. A lower hip position slackens the hamstring, and a slack hamstring doesn't anchor the hip position well. Naturally, what happens will be the hip will start to raise where the hamstrings can fully anchor the hip position before the hip extension starts to happen. This is why you see the back becomes more horizontal first before it becomes more vertical again.
I like it.
We are going to use this model to illustrate the deadlift. We have discussed how the hip needs to be locked in position in order for the hip extension to happen. But lastly, we have one more joint that we need to stabilize. And if you see this red band over here, it represents our lats. Our lats contract and provide resistance so that the force can be transferred throughout our arm segment. Theoretically, this muscle of the lats need to attach at 90 degrees to our humerus so that it can provide the maximum amount of force to stabilize the joint. When that happens, the arms are not going to be plumb vertically. Usually there should be a little bit of an angle inwards. So if you are paying attention to any heavy deadlift, you can see that the shoulder joint will be slightly in front of the bar. At the end, the last thing that I want to do from this video is to criticize the form of these world-class athletes. Obviously, they are all very strong and very successful in their sports. But we want to learn from them whether we can find the most efficient position to start the pull. Obviously, we have learned that the bar needs to stay on top of the midfoot, which is the center of balance. Any position that is not at the center of the foot will provide us an additional unnecessary movement arm. Efficient also means that the force that you projected to the floor can immediately be channeled to the bar. With that, the hip position will be higher than what most people think is comfortable, as it will allow the hamstrings to anchor the hip position effectively. If you can see that your hips are shooting up while performing the lift, most likely your hip position were too low at the beginning. Try it again with a slightly higher hip position. Lastly, the shoulder will need to be slightly in front of the bar so that the lats can attach at 90 degrees to our humerus. These are the ideal landmarks that you need to hit at the beginning of your pull. Please give it a try, and I hope this will help you lifting more weights. Thank you.
I like it.